Hello and welcome to your IELTS guide. This is a guided e-learning video series about the IELTS exam, where we will introduce you to the exam and give you practical tips in order to perform well. If you like these tips, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. My name is Rebecca. This is my co-host Paddy.
Hello, nice to be here.
We're both teachers and content creators in the world of IELTS. In this episode, we're going to discuss General Training Writing Task 1, more specifically, letters.
So, what is General Training Task 1, Rebecca?
Well, it's a letter, and you might wonder, as everyone does, why a letter in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time you wrote a letter to someone?
I can't remember.
No, I think I maybe have sent a postcard to a friend within the last 5 years, but it's not something that people do. The fact is, you can forget about the word letter. It says that in the question, but really consider it an email, because that's how we communicate. They don't use the word email, but it is basically an email. So this idea of it needs to be have these formal letter structures is partly true, but it's also slightly misleading, slightly confusing, and I'll explain more about that later. Really, they call it a letter because it's about communication. It's about sending a message to someone. So General Training Task 1 is a test of your ability to communicate specific purposes to a specific person. So you might have to invite somebody to an event. You might have to accept an invitation to an event. You might be applying for a job, applying for a position, complaining about something, thanking someone, giving news, asking for information. There's a huge number of reasons that you email someone or send a message to your friend. And this idea of who you are writing to is also really important, because an email that you send to your auntie is going to be different to an email that you send to the boss of a company that you're applying for a job with. So it's a test of your ability to clearly communicate your purpose, but also to use the correct tone or register with the person that you are talking to. So with regards to the first question, purpose. What is the purpose of your letter? Well, that's something that you need to figure out when you are writing. Most of that information can be got from the question, but sometimes you need to do a little bit of logical thinking yourself. You know, if the question tells you that last week you went to Italy and your friend is writing to you asking for advice on places to go in Italy, well, the purpose of your letter is to give advice, but you're probably also going to describe your past experiences as well. That would be logical. Even if the question doesn't tell you to do it, that is something that you would include naturally. So there's a little bit of imagination and logical thinking. Just put yourself in that situation and think about what you would do. So first of all, read the question carefully. If you miss one of the points that the question tells you to do, you will lose marks in task achievement. You're not going to get 7, 8, 9 if you miss one of the bullet points or one of the instructions in the question. So do everything that it tells you to do. But again, as I said before, include relevant information that feels natural. For example, if you're inviting someone to a party at your house, Rebecca, what information would you give someone if you were doing that?
Definitely how to get there. That's crucial. What to bring or not to bring. This could be cultural as well, because in some cultures you're supposed to bring something. In others, I think it's actually an offense to try and bring something to the host. And just maybe, obviously, the time when they're supposed to be there and what they can expect once they are there.
Absolutely. I read recently in Romania, it's offensive to bring an even number of flowers.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, it is. I don't know why. It's a superstition. And then you're also not supposed to, if someone brings you something, you're not supposed to open that gift in front of them.
Oh, really?
Because whatever reaction might not be what's expected. So if you're too happy, that's overdoing it. And if you're not happy enough, then again, you're offending the person giving you the gift.
In the UK, we learn from a young age to practice being excited about a gift constantly.
That's very useful.
So yeah, all of that information is relevant, but also it's an opportunity to show off your language. So you mentioned giving directions to someone to get to your house. Well, that's an interesting use of direction giving. After you've gone past the roundabout, remember to take the first left, and I'm just on the corner. Those expressions, take the first left, I'm just on the corner. The question didn't tell me to include that information, but hey, I've just shown off my ability to do that function in my letter. Great. Similarly, giving advice on what to bring. It'd be great if you could take a bottle of wine to give to my wife, or it would be really handy if you could bring along some ice because we are likely to have run out. Opportunity to use some interesting grammatical structures there.
I love this contraction, it'd. I always feel it's underused for some reason.
Definitely, yeah, it's a good one. And, if this is an informal situation, then contractions are relevant. You're displaying your ability to use informal language to a friend. Of course, all of that would be different if it was inviting a client to a business meeting, but, it depends on the situation. And so another thing to mention is format. I mentioned before that it's better to think of this as an email and not a letter, even though the question calls it a letter. The reason I say that is because many students who have had very good formal English education or have learned letter writing in their own schools, especially the older generation, I'll say this is true for, they have learned this structure of put the address at the top, put the date underneath that, put the person's address on the other side of the letter, all these kind of very formal structures. You don't need to do this in your task, and in fact, I would recommend not doing it. It's a waste of time. The question doesn't tell you to do it. So, no date, no address at the top. It's going to take you 30 seconds to write. You don't need 30 seconds taken out of your time for writing the actual information which you need to put. You should start with a greeting. Then you should have the main body of your letter. Then you should have some sign-off expressions. And sure, put your name at the end. This stuff isn't really marked, but it's part of what would be expected. So that's really all you need.
But no subject line, because you said you need to think about it as if it was an email. However, if you have a subject line, that's already against the format that's expected.
Definitely. And the reason for that is the question will say, begin your letter as follows, Dear Mr. Jones, or Dear Sir/Madam, or Dear Joe. Follow that instruction. That's how you should start your letter. Don't start it with anything else. Start it with that. So if you follow that rule, then you can't go far wrong. So let's go back to the other important aspect. We've got purpose and we've got register. What does register mean?
Register is the style or the way you address someone, in this case in writing. And we have 3 different registers. The informal one, which would be for family and friends, semi-formal for someone you know but don't know well, or a colleague, for instance, and then the formal style, which would be for people you don't know at all, or someone in authority, let's say a bank manager. Interestingly, the more we know someone and the more comfortable we are around them, the more the language we use relaxes. We can compare a question like, want to grab a bite to eat, which is very informal, to would you care to have lunch at 1 o'clock, which is very formal. And also, the more formal the language is, the more words seem to be needed, the less emotion there seems to be. And there's overall more caution, to the point where what we call absolute statements are avoided. An absolute statement would be saying that learning a second language is a difficult process for everyone. But when we're being formal, we turn it into learning a second language maybe, or tends to be, or seems to be a difficult process for some people or for many students. So this is something interesting that happens as we switch from one style to another.
Formal structures often have those very complex, almost convoluted conditional structures. I would be grateful if you could, etc. And as you said, this often means that formal sentences are longer. So you'd think that formal letters are just longer in words than informal letters. But one thing to keep in mind is that there are things you would include in an informal letter that you would not include in a formal letter. The ones that come to my mind are idiomatic expressions, and giving your opinions. Like, oh, I think it's going to be great. You probably wouldn't put that in a formal letter. Just randomly putting your opinions in, even though it's not called for, that's a very personal, informal thing. Whereas with formal letters, this is what's happening, this is what's expected, no other unnecessary information is included.
Yes. You stick to the facts when you're being formal because you have to. Whereas, like you said, with the informal style, there's a lot of you in there.
Definitely.
However, sometimes there's a bit of confusion regarding the semi-formal style because it's in between formal and informal. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, semi-formal is in between formal and informal. In terms of vocabulary, it's probably more close to informal in that it does use idiomatic structures. You might, say to your colleague, if you could pass that along to me as soon as you're done with it. That's a more informal way of speaking instead of I would be grateful if that could be delivered at the moment of completion. That's a slightly more formal way to say the same thing. Again, notice the use of passives, the depersonalization of formal language, whereas semi-formal language, it's a lot more friendly and chatty. The difference between informal and semi-formal is, again, about this unnecessary information. With informal messages, we include unnecessary information because it's with a friend. It's chatty. It's conversational. With semi-formal, you're usually talking to a work colleague. And so you have a very specific purpose. You don't want to waste their time too much. So you're using friendly, less than formal language to express a professional purpose. So you're probably not going to ask them questions about how their weekend was, but you might use more phrasal verbs to discuss workplace activities, look up, sort out, hand in, stuff like that. I mentioned colleagues as being the main reason we use semi-formal language. That is most context in IELTS. The only other example I can think of is perhaps a stranger who you are writing to, so a person you don't know, but you're writing to for less than formal reasons.
Yes.
The example that comes to mind is somebody found your phone on a train and they gave it to lost property at a station. You have their contact information. You're writing to them to say thank you. Again, you're not applying for a job with this person. This person is not, the mayor of your town. You're writing to say thanks. It's friendly, but you don't know them, so you can't be that personal. That's where semi-formal language would come in.
Interestingly, if it was a letter of complaint, it would be highly unlikely for it to be informal or semi-formal just by its nature.
The only example I can think of is a neighbor who you do have an existing relationship with. It wouldn't be informal, but semi-formal perhaps, because you're not happy. But also, if you're too formal, that would be very cold, and it might come across aggressive if you've met this person before. Letters of complaint, most of them are going to be very formal. Yeah,
true. It's also important to have a clear progression of ideas in General Training Task 1. And what do we mean by that? Well, it's just like telling a story in order. You wouldn't start at the end. That would be logical. You wouldn't give the ending first, then jump back, to the middle of the action or the beginning. You have the responsibility to guide your reader step by step by having this logical, easy to follow flow. Your letter, well, this goes without saying, but your letter should feel like it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. These should be clearly signposted, and each part should build naturally on the previous one. Because sometimes there's this question of the order of bullet points. Should I actually follow that order? Well, my suggestion would be yes, because there's a point to that. Whoever designed the task had that in mind. So it's just easier for you to follow that order. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to have this, exercise in creativity where you turn everything around and write in an unexpected way, because that's not the point of the task.
They've created a plan for you, haven't they? Like, why not use it? Saves you time.
Yes. So how does this work in practice? Start by introducing why you're writing, which is your purpose. then move through each bullet point, as we've said already, logically, using clear paragraphs, and finish by closing politely. Of course, if it's an informal letter, then the sign-off should be suitable for that. As an example, if it's a formal letter of complaint, you wouldn't start with the complaint without first explaining what happened, or jump to asking for a refund without giving details of the situation first. So it's as simple as that.
I think you can solve the problem of clear progression of ideas by just planning a little bit before you write. If you look at what you have to include in your letter and go, well, in this paragraph, I'm going to do that, answer this bullet point, I'm going to include these details. In this paragraph, I'm going to answer that bullet point, include these details. You're going to have a clear progression of ideas. You're going to demonstrate structure. So you should be fine if you just make a little plan. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching your IELTS guide. Remember that you can do more IELTS practice and see more classes on IELTS Ready Premium. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Good luck with your studies and goodbye.